Carolyn Doobie here. What's the play for today? Today I'm going to be gel printing on fabric. And that part's no problem. But what I do with the fabric, well, let's just say that's going to be a bit of an adventure. And what I'm going to do is turn that fabric into this holiday gnome. I've got my 8x10 gel press plate here. I've put the Stencil Girl stencil on top of it. And for color, I'm going to be using some Amsterdam paint. When you're gel printing on fabric, it is a little bit different than gel printing on paper, because the fabric is more absorbent than paper usually, at least any paper that I've used. So as I'm putting the paint on here, I'm being a little more generous than I would be if I was doing this on paper. Because if you want a lot of color, a strong color, you are going to need to have plenty of paint on there. And so that's why I'm actually adding a little bit more red, because again, this will get absorbed a lot faster on fabric than it will on paper. Now the paint that I'm using is a wonderful paint, but it's not a fabric paint. So is it going to be safe to do this? Absolutely. Because I'm not planning on washing this fabric. I'm making something to use in a project, not something to go through the washing machine. And you might be wondering, hey, is that a special fabric? Nope, not a special fabric at all. It is white cotton fabric. Couldn't even tell you any more than that. To people that sew, that are really knowledgeable about different types of fabrics, they might be able to tell you, but for me, it's a white cotton fabric. So once I've got good contact between the fabric and the paint, then I lift it up just like if I was doing this with paper. Now I only did about half of the fabric and I want to get red on the other half of it, so I need to get the plate ready to do this again. And to do that, I'm going to take a ghost pull here and pull up the wet paint that's still on the plate. I could have used fabric to do this. I can use paper, I can use another print, you can use just about anything. Thing that I'm looking for here is just to get that damp paint off of there so I can do the other half of that fabric to look the same way that the first part did. So now that the plate's cleaned off, it's time to put that stencil back on there and add some more of that wonderful red paint. So the reason why I was making this fabric is because I'd seen this tutorial, an easy way to make a gnome, and it used red felt. And I was sure I had some, but nope, lo and behold, digging through the closet, didn't have any. And I thought, well, I can simply make some red and white fabric. This will be a lot of fun. It'll have a fun pattern on it. And yeah, there were some things that I didn't quite think through all the way, but never fear, it came out in the end, and you'll see that in just a moment when I put that gnome together. So I've got plenty of paint on here. Notice I'm not being shy because the fabric will absorb a lot more of it than paper will. And so now, to make sure that I don't get any of the part that's already printed here on the plate, what I'm going to do is just sort of fold it over right at where the pattern ends, so that when I put this down on the plate, I'm sure that the part that's already printed on doesn't accidentally get a little bit more on it. And that's a me thing, because I tend to get things where I didn't mean for them to go. So you might not need to do that. But for me, this is what I need to do to get that pattern so it doesn't end up where I don't want it. And aren't you impressed how perfectly this is all going to line up? I mean, I didn't seem to spend a lot of time carefully making sure there wouldn't be any little seam or white space showing between the two patterns going onto this piece of fabric. Well, actually, I didn't work that hard at it. I wasn't that careful. And when I pull this up, you are going to see a little bit of a seam. But guess what? It's not going to matter for what I'm doing here. And if that seam isn't really going to show much, I'm not going to put a lot of effort into making sure it's perfectly lined up. So let's take that fabric and turn it into a gnome now. So what I've got here is some fake fur, and I've got just a wood slice there that I'm going to use as the head, the shape that I'm going to glue this on. And the tutorial that I'm following here, this was created by Ruffles and Rain Boots. She's got a lot of fantastic gnome tutorials, and they're really easy. And she is much more graceful about this. Me, not so much. Cutting that fur, getting it to the right size, she just goes snippy, snippy, whippy, and it's done in her video. But it took me a little bit longer. So I cut that stuff out for you. And if you want to see how to do these, all the tips and tricks for dealing with this fur and that kind of stuff, please check out her tutorial. She does a fantastic job with them. All right, so I've got the fur on there. That's hot glued on. Now, the next thing she does in her video is she puts a mustache on these guys. She takes a little strip of fur and puts it on and creates this fun, playful mustache. Now, I have to say, when I put my mustache on there, it didn't look quite as fun as hers. It doesn't really look like a mustache to me. So that is telling me I should probably go back and watch her tutorial again and see what little something about the mustache I've missed. And isn't that one of the great things about having these things in video? We can pause them or go back and watch them anytime we want. All right, now for the nose, I found a bead that I thought was a wonderful nose shape. And when I went in to glue it in place, I found fur that, well, wasn't stuck down very well. So I realized, ooh, should probably get a little of that hot glue in there so I can get it on there securely before I start adding things like a nose to it. Oh, and the twine that I've got there, that is what's going to be the hanger for this big ornament. And I made it super, super long because I don't know how tall the hat's going to be on my gnome. So I purposely made that piece of twine super long so that when I'm all done, I can actually tie it down to the size that it needs to be. Now that it has a nose, it's time to talk about the hat. Now I cut this out following the tutorial from Ruffles and Rain Boots to create the fabric shape there. And as I was testing it out and trying it on here, I realized I had two problems. I didn't like that raw edge just right there on the gnome. And then the other thing is this is a thin fabric. So it just wasn't firm enough to go on here. And I realized that both of these problems are things that I can solve. But granted, it's not going to be smooth to solve them, but they will get solved. So for the fabric being too thin, I realized if I just double it up, it'll get thicker. So I brought in just a plain piece of white fabric here, and I'm going to lay the hat shape on top of it, and I'm simply going to cut out a liner for it. Now, to those of you that sew on a regular basis, you might think, wow, it'd be really nice if she just sewed these together, and that probably would have made a lot of sense. But I had the hot glue gun right there, so why not just do that? So I'm going to use a little bit of that hot glue to just sort of hold it in place so it doesn't slide around while I'm cutting it out. There are projects that I've tried off of Pinterest that were complete Pinterest fails, but this one to me is not one of those, but it is a Pinterest fumble, meaning it's a little awkward the first time you do something. Oh, wait, that's like everything, right? The first time you do it, you expect it to have a little bit of a learning curve. Now again, a sewing machine probably would have made this a little bit easier, but again, I was fixated on that hot glue gun. And so what I'm going to do is hem this the hot glue way. Just putting little bits of hot glue there and then folding it over. But here's the thing, if you have 2 layers of fabric and you're folding it over this way, only the inside layer really sticks. So you kind of need to use even more hot glue. But that's okay. That'll make it just a little bit firmer and it'll just make it a clear edge there. Now I've sped up the camera here because basically this is just me gluing and gluing and gluing and then using a little more hot glue to make things stick. Now once I've got the hem made, then it's time to get the hat on the gnome. And you'll see that it'll look great from the front, but the back, well, let's just say that'll be a secret between you and I. One of the cool things that she does in the tutorial is she points out that how it goes around the nose is a big deal. And so you want to glue it around the nose first. And so I'm putting the hot glue on there and I'm actually very, very happy with the scrunching up around the nose. And once that's done, I'm like, oh, now the rest of it, I don't have to be quite so careful about it because it's going to be happening in the back. And I love that this is going to be a part that nobody's really going to see because I thought it would all line up neatly and, well, not so much, but scissors, a little hot glue, everything will work out. Now the gnome that's in the tutorial, when you watch that, you'll see that it's a much smaller gnome because she's using a smaller wood slice. This is the wood slice I could find, so this is the size that I created. And I do love that it is a completely flexible way of doing this, so it's whatever size wood slice you've got, you can create a gnome that size. And since I made the pattern on the fabric, I was able to choose what color I wanted and what pattern, thanks to my gel press plate. That means I can make more of these and have them coordinate together so that they'll be similar, related, coordinating, but not exactly the same. So now, after a whole bunch of hot gluing here, the hat is almost completely on. And I'm just going to do a couple little trim ups here, tuck under, so it'll look like I actually had it all sized right, but you've been watching the video. You know there was a whole lot of adjusting as I went and did this. But now my gnome is just about done. I'm going to clean up the fur a little bit, kind of snazz it up, and then also change the length on that hanger. It's way longer than it needs to be. But now that I know how big the hat is, now I can adjust that. And that'll be the hanger that it hangs from the tree on. Now, if you're new to gel printing, if you're new to gel press and you're wondering, well, what else can these plates do besides print on fabric? Oh, they can do so much stuff. So hit that subscribe button. That way you'll know as soon as Gel Press has a new video out and you can see more ways to use that wonderful plate. Well, thanks so much for joining me for today's play, and thank you for letting me be a part of your creative journey.